Hey guys, in today's video I want to talk about building guitars as a hobby versus building guitars as a business. I'm Chris at Highline Guitars, and the reason why I think that this is an important subject to discuss is because when I make videos where I talk about building guitars, I think a lot of folks are sometimes confused about some of the tips and techniques and the tools that I use. And it may not align with what they're trying to do when it comes to making guitars. And this is especially true when I demonstrate the use of my CNC machine to carve guitar bodies, fretboards, and necks. Some of you out there probably have no desire or intention to use a CNC machine. So when you see me doing that, it kind of creates a sense of confusion as to what type of tools and techniques should you be using based on how you want to make guitars. When I first started building guitars over 20 years ago, all I had available as far as tools were concerned was some chisels, a hand plane, a spoke shave. I had one of those old hand crank drills, and I was building guitars using traditional woodworking tools and traditional woodworking techniques. But that's what I wanted to do because, like many of you watching, I was really lured to the hobby based on the romance of using the old tools that have been in existence for centuries. And the idea of making a guitar using these basic tools and the effort to master those tools was really appealing to me. And the first several guitars that I built, I was using that approach. But as time passed, I started to add more tools to help make the process easier. And in the beginning, I was just a hobby builder. I was building guitars for myself, for family members. I had no real thought or intention of selling guitars or making a business. But as time passed, I became so enamored with the hobby of building guitars that I discovered that it can get quite expensive. Buying all the wood, the parts, the pickups, the bridges, the tuners, all the components. It can get pretty costly. And I was building guitars just for the sake of building guitars. And I started to acquire all these guitars. Well, it was at that point that I decided to sort of transition from being a hobby builder to being what I call a self-supported hobby builder, which means I would build a guitar just for the thrill of building it, but then I'd sell it, and I'd use the proceeds from that sale to build the next guitar. And I did this for a number of years, and during that process, I realized that the more guitars you make, the harder it is on your wrists, your elbows, your shoulders, your neck, your back, your knees. It can be pretty stressful physically. So I started looking for tools and techniques that would make the process a little bit easier. And that's when I invested in a drill press, a bandsaw, a bunch of different random orbital sanders. And then eventually I got a planer, a joiner, and I even built my own drum sander. And at that point, I was able to make guitars much more easily, much more efficiently, and faster. And that really played into the whole idea of my self-supported hobby. I could build guitars and sell them fairly quickly. And then as time passed, I started to entertain the idea of creating a business. And it was right around that time that I came up with the Highline Guitars name, and I registered it as a LLC, Limited Liability Corporation. And I decided I was going to start building more guitars and selling them. And I really thought I could make a run at starting a business. But to do that, I realized I was going to have to make my method faster and more efficient. And even though I had the bandsaw and the drill press and all those other power tools, and those certainly do help, I decided I was going to need to step it up a notch if I wanted to build a higher volume of guitars. And it was at that point that I started looking at two options. One was CNC technology. The other was a pin router. And I really like the idea of a pin router because there's no front end. Now, front end is, with regard to CNC, that is the use of a computer to design your guitars and then to create the files that are necessary for CNC work. You don't have that with a pin router. Instead, this is your CNC brain. It's your own head, your own mind. And you control the application of the wood to the router with your hands. So it's a kind of a mind-to-hand connection. And I really liked that idea. The only problem was pin routers are not as common as they once used to be. They aren't made much anymore. And that's because a lot of the companies that make them have transitioned over to CNC. But there were still a couple of pin routers on the market. One was made by, I believe it was Jet Tools made it, and then there were a couple that were sold by Grizzly. But when I was looking at those machines, they're really expensive. And in fact, they're as expensive as a really good quality entry-level CNC machine. So I was kind of hesitant to go down that route. And I thought, well, what I should do is see if I can buy a used pin router, because I knew that a lot of guys who were using pin routers, a lot of shops that are using pin routers, I should say, are transitioning or were transitioning over to CNC. So I thought there might be an opportunity there to buy a used pin router. However, at the time, I couldn't find one. There just weren't any available. And I believe at the time, the pin routers from Grizzly were a couple of $1,000s. Same thing with the Jet. So I did what is so typical for me, is I decided, let's build my own pin router. And that's exactly what I did. I designed and built my own pin router, and it worked really well. However, it was a little bit of a hassle to use because to raise and lower the router, I had to do it manually by hand, by loosening up a couple of knobs and raising and lowering it, which was kind of a pain. But it did work, and I did that for a couple of years. And then I finally decided to break down and buy a CNC machine. And the first CNC machine that I used was the Inventables X-Carve, the original belt-driven CNC machine. And it was at that time that I really started to realize the true power of CNC. And I started using the CNC machine as a way to make my guitar building more efficient and faster, so that I was actually in a manufacturing mode. And what I did was I used the CNC machine to make the bodies, the necks, and the fretboards. And what I would do is I would set aside a week, 5 days, Monday through Friday, and I would make nothing but bodies for that week. And I was making 2 bodies a day. And I had 2 designs, a double cutaway and a single cutaway. And I was able to make, in a week, 10 bodies. Then the next week, I'd make necks. And I had a design for the double cutaway and a design for the single cutaway. 2 different style necks. The main difference was the headstock shapes were slightly different. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video, I would encourage you to click the thumbs up button down below. Do it right now. It's a great way to show my channel support, and it doesn't cost you anything. But if you'd like to take your support to the next level, you can visit my eGuitar Plans web store or my Highline Guitars merch store. There's links in the description below. And any purchase you make there is going to help support this channel so that I can keep making guitar building videos and sharing my knowledge and experience with you. You can also click the thanks button down below and leave a tip in the amount that you think is fair. But if you want to get the most out of my channel, I would encourage you to click the join button down below and consider becoming a member. As a member, you're going to have access to videos just like the one you're watching, but with a lot more information and detail, and best of all, no ads. Now let's get back to the video. But I could make a neck in the morning and a neck in the afternoon. And that way at the end of the week, I had 10 necks. So then on the following week, the third week, I would make my fretboards. And on Monday, I would make it was 2 fretboards in the morning, 2 fretboards in the afternoon. So in one day I could make 4 fretboards. So by halfway through Wednesday, I had my 10 fretboards to go with the 10 necks that went with the 10 bodies. So then during that remainder of the week, and then the following week, I was sanding, finishing, and assembling the guitars. So in about a month's time, I could do 10 guitars. And that seemed to work out really well. And I was selling these guitars and making a fairly decent little profit. And I knew that if I really wanted to, I could probably speed it up even more. But to do that, I was going to have a more robust CNC machine than the Inventables X-Carve that I had. That original, like I said, was a belt-driven CNC machine. And it's sort of limited in how fast you can run it. So what I did was I designed and built my own CNC machine. And if you've been watching my channel for long enough, you probably remember the CNC machine that was all painted yellow. I called it Old Yeller. And I was using that CNC machine because that one was designed to be much more robust. It used lead screws instead of belts, so I could run it faster. But then I started doing not only the batch runs, but I was also doing custom work. People would ask me to design and build guitars for them. So I would use the CNC, and I had become proficient enough in the software that I could design a guitar completely on the computer in just a couple of hours. So I was able to use CNC to make one-off custom guitars. And that was working pretty well. And at one point, I had a commission to build a guitar for the band Metallica. And you may have seen the videos where I built that guitar. In fact, I'll post a link up above to a video that shows the building that guitar. And as part of the deal to build that, I was working in cooperation with the folks at Inventables who made my original X-Carve CNC machine. They sent me the X-Carve Pro. And this machine was a massive upgrade, even from the machine that I had used, that I had designed and built myself. This one uses Acme lead screws and is just a much faster, more powerful CNC machine. And I knew with this machine, I could work even faster. I could make more bodies quicker and necks and fretboards. But at about that same time, I decided to change my business approach. And instead of continuing as a manufacturer, I decided to pull back and go back to what I was doing before, which was the self-sustaining hobby. And I'm also using this as an opportunity to build up my YouTube channel. But I decided that I wanted to focus more on just building guitars that I designed myself, my own ideas, instead of batch runs of the same designs over and over and over. I'm still using the CNC to do this work, but I think that that's where people get confused. When they watch my videos, they're looking for techniques and the tools and the tips and tricks for building guitars, but they'll see me using a CNC machine, and that doesn't necessarily play into how they want to make guitars using the old school hand tools. Now, I can certainly understand the aura and the allure of using these older style tools. There is a great satisfaction that one can experience when using these old old school tools and techniques to make a guitar. A tremendous amount of self-satisfaction when you finish building a guitar. However, in the modern era, we also have CNC technology now. And the way that the software has been improved over the years, you can use CNC technology if you're just a hobby builder. This actually becomes part of the hobby. And there's no reason why you can't consider yourself a hobby builder with CNC. But of course, that means investing in the CNC machine, the computer that runs it, and then the software that you have to use to create your designs. And unfortunately, there is a bit of a learning curve and a financial expense there that isn't always the sort of thing that your average garage builder wants to invest in. So you have to use the old school tools if you want to build a guitar. But I know there are a lot of you out there watching who have entertained the idea of starting a business using the old school tools and techniques and using it as a way to differentiate how you're going to build guitars for your customers. I would urge a little bit of caution here, because even though there is a market for totally hand-built guitars using old school tools, it's very difficult to compete in the modern world with builders who are using CNC technology. There is no way you're going to be able to build guitars as fast as someone who can make it with a CNC machine. And it's doubtful that you're going to be able to compete with them on price, because when you factor in the labor cost of making a guitar using these old school tools, guitars could get way too expensive. And if you don't charge a fair price for your labor, you're undercutting yourself. You're also undercutting anybody else who builds guitars using the old school tools and techniques. But there's just no way that you're going to be able to compete with somebody who's cranking out guitars on a CNC machine. So if you want to build guitars using old school tools and techniques, you're either going to have to do it solely as a hobby, maybe as a self-supporting hobby. But if you're going to do it as a business, I would highly recommend that you consider it a side gig rather than something you're going to try to make a living at, because it's going to be very difficult for you to compete with builders using modern state-of-the-art CNC technology. Now, you can also do what I did when I moved from just being a hobby builder to a self-supporting hobby builder, and that is you can invest in all the other power tools that are necessary, and you could probably increase your volume. You're still not going to be able to do the same kind of volume that somebody using a CNC machine is going to use, but you still might be able to build guitars a little bit faster than if you were to use solely non-electrically powered hand tools. So that's kind of the topic that I wanted to cover in today's video, and I hope you found this to be thought-provoking and interesting. You know, whatever you think, put your comments down below. I'd be curious to see what some of you out there who are building using hand tools or building using CNC think about using these tools and techniques for building guitars, and whether it makes sense to use old school tools to build guitars as a business, or whether you feel that it's necessary to use CNC in order to be competitive with all of those low-cost guitars that have flooded the market in recent years. Of course, all that's changing, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. At any rate, if you've enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. That always helps the channel, as I always say. And of course, if you want to help support the channel, you can do some of the things I mentioned earlier. And until the next video, as always, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for more guitar building videos.